A soft blue light flickered inside the Galactic Council's command chamber. The massive hall, built on a space station orbiting the neutral world of Velmar Prime, housed representatives from dozens of advanced civilizations. Today, however, a sense of unease filled the air. The reason? A sudden and unexpected distress signal. High Commander Valix of the Zorveni Dominion, a tall reptilian figure with golden scales, studied the holographic display with narrowed eyes. "Play the message again," he ordered. The hologram flickered, and a deep robotic voice echoed through the chamber. "A.L. Eert. A human war vessel has entered Galactic space. Identification: unknown. Intentions: unknown. Requesting immediate action." Silence followed. The room was filled with tension. Even among the oldest civilizations present, no one had ever encountered a fully armed human warship in deep space before. A small insectoid ambassador named Cathura clicked her mandibles. Humans, why would they send a warship? They are still a young species. Counselor Drex, a member of the amphibious Varlos species, shifted uneasily. Perhaps it is a simple patrol vessel. Valix shook his head. No. Look at the readings. This ship is heavily armed. It carries enough firepower to challenge an entire fleet. And most concerning, it is moving toward Zirek-controlled space. A murmur spread through the chamber. The Zirak Dominion was one of the most militaristic empires in the galaxy. If humanity was heading there, it meant something serious had happened. A booming voice interrupted the discussion. Humans do not send warships without reason. All eyes turned toward the Zirak representative, Lord Arvok. His armored form loomed over the others. His species, the Zirak, were known for their ruthlessness, their empire built on conquest. Yet now, Arvok looked uneasy. Valix narrowed his eyes. "Lord Arvok, do you know something about this?" Arvok hesitated, his claws flexing against the metal table. "We may have had a small conflict with a human colony recently." Silence. Then a cold voice spoke. "What did you do?" Arvok exhaled sharply. "A minor dispute over territory. Our forces took control of a colony. Small, insignificant. We assumed the humans would negotiate." Valix's expression darkened. "Negotiate? You attacked them, didn't you?" Arvok straightened. "They were weak. We assumed they would submit." The chamber erupted in whispers. It was a mistake. Humans were new to the galactic stage, but they had already gained a reputation for stubbornness and unpredictability. They were different from most species. Where others would retreat, humans fought back. Where others would surrender, humans resisted until the end. And now, a warship was coming. A holographic officer from the Council's fleet appeared. The human vessel is ignoring all hails. It does not respond to warnings. It does not slow down. It is coming. Thera clicked her mandibles nervously. "We must stop them before this escalates into a war." Valix considered the options. The Galactic Council had always tried to keep balance in the galaxy, avoiding unnecessary wars. But now, they were caught between a dangerous choice: support the Zirek and risk injuring humanity, or let the humans take their revenge and allow an empire to fall. Lord Arvok growled, "If the humans come for us, we will crush them." But deep down, even he did not believe those words. The Zirak had raided a human colony, expecting fear and surrender. Instead, they had awakened something far worse. And now, the HSV Revenant, a human war vessel, was on its way. The galaxy was about to witness what humans were truly capable of. The Galactic Council's fleet moved swiftly, positioning itself between the incoming HSV Revenant and Zirek-controlled space. Warships from multiple species formed a blockade: sleek Varlos cruisers, massive Zorveni dreadnoughts, and agile insectoid skirmishers. Their weapons were armed, but no one wanted to fire the first shot. Inside the command deck of the GCS Ardent Flame, Admiral Keeler, a blue-skinned amphibian, watched the incoming human warship with growing concern. The Revenant was unlike any vessel he had seen before. Most galactic ships relied on energy shields and evasive maneuvers, but this human warship, it was built like a fortress. Thick armor plating covered its entire structure, and the heat signatures from its weapon systems were off the charts. Keylor turned to his communications officer. "Try again. Send them a direct transmission on all frequencies." The officer nodded and activated the transmission. "Unidentified human vessel. This is Admiral Keylor of the Galactic Council. You are approaching restricted space. Identify yourself and state your purpose." Silence. Keylor's fingers tightened. "Try again." The officer sent another message. "Revenant, you are in violation of Galactic Council regulations. Stand down immediately, or we will be forced to take action." For a moment, it seemed as if the human ship would ignore them again. Then suddenly, the communications console lit up. The Revenant was responding. The main screen flickered, revealing a human figure. A man in a dark uniform sat in the captain's chair. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold and focused. His nameplate read, "Admiral James Cutter." His voice was steady, without hesitation. "We are not here for diplomacy." Keylor frowned. "Then why are you here?" Cutter leaned forward slightly. "The Xerac Dominion attacked one of our colonies. They took civilians. They thought there would be no consequences." His voice grew harder. "They were wrong." A ripple of unease passed through the council officers. Keylor hesitated before speaking. "Admiral Cutter, we understand your anger. But if you attack Xerac space, it will start a war. The Council cannot allow this." Cutter's expression did not change. "Then move aside." Keylor's throat tightened. "If we do not." For the first time, Cutter's gaze darkened. His voice dropped into something cold and final. "Then you become part of the problem." Silence filled the command deck. The council officers exchanged nervous glances. No species had ever spoken to them like this before. Keylor exhaled. "We will not allow." An alarm blared through the ship. "Admiral." A tactical officer interrupted. "The Revenant just increased speed. It's coming straight for us." Keylor's eyes widened. "Raise shields. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." But it was already too late. The HSV Revenant did not slow down. It did not hesitate. It moved with absolute confidence, as if the blockade did not exist. Then, in a sudden flash of movement, it fired. Not at the council ships, but through them. A single warning shot, a railgun round, passed between the council warships, missing by mere meters. The sheer force of the kinetic blast shattered the shields of nearby vessels and sent shockwaves through their hulls. The message was clear. The Revenant could have destroyed them, but it didn't. On the Ardent Flames Bridge, Admiral Keylor felt a chill crawl down his spine. "They could have wiped us out just now," he whispered. Cutter's voice came again, calm but unshakable. "We are going to the Xerac Dominion. Do not interfere." The communication cut off. The HSV Revenant surged forward, breaking through the blockade with ease. Keylor sat frozen in his chair. The humans had just challenged the entire Galactic Council, and won without firing a single lethal shot. As the human warship disappeared into the darkness of space, one thought echoed in Keylor's mind. The Xerac have no idea what's coming for them. Deep inside the Xerac Dominion's central war chamber, Lord Arvok sat in silence, his claws tapping against the metal table. The room was dimly lit, filled with the deep hum of holographic displays. Around him, Xerac generals and admirals stood frozen, staring at the latest tactical report. The HSV Revenant was coming. No fleet had stopped it. No warning had slowed it down. The humans had ignored the Galactic Council's authority and were now heading straight for Xerac-controlled space. Arvok clenched his jaw. "How long until it reaches our territory?" A nervous officer, smaller and less armored than the others, checked the data on his display. "At its current speed, less than 3 hours, Supreme Lord." Arvok's claws scraped against the table, leaving deep marks. The Zirak Dominion had fought countless wars, conquered weaker civilizations, and crushed any resistance that stood against them. But this was different. One human warship. One. And yet, the Council fleet, the most advanced alliance of species in the galaxy, had failed to stop it. Arvok turned to his generals. I want every warship available to form a defense line. If the humans seek war, we will show them our strength. But his warriors hesitated. One of his top commanders, General Calith, stepped forward. His voice was low, almost uncertain. Supreme Lord, we cannot underestimate them. Arvok's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Calith hesitated before continuing. When we attacked the human colony, we expected an easy victory. Their defenses were weak. Their people were civilians. Yet, he took a deep breath. Even with no real weapons, they fought back. A murmur spread through the war chamber. It was unheard of. A species so outmatched, so vulnerable, yet refusing to surrender. Arvok frowned. That was expected. Primitive species always resist before they break. Caliph shook his head. No, Supreme Lord. They never broke. We lost 3 full battalions before we secured the colony. The room fell silent. Even Arvok, the most ruthless of the Zirak warlords, felt a sliver of doubt crawl into his mind. Calith continued, his voice now a whisper. We captured survivors, civilians. We took them as prisoners, expecting them to beg for mercy. But they did not. They only asked us one thing. Arvok's chest tightened. What did they ask? Calith's mandibles clicked together before he spoke the words that had haunted him since the battle. Is our fleet coming? Arvok sat back in his throne, his mind racing. The humans had not pleaded. They had not bargained. They had expected their people to come for them. And now, their warship was here. A different officer, one of the intelligence commanders, cleared his throat. Supreme Lord, I believe we have made a mistake. Arvok glared at him. Explain. The officer hesitated, then brought up a series of classified reports. Before we attacked their colony, we assumed humans were like any other species. Tribal, divided, easy to manipulate. But new intelligence suggests something terrifying. He zoomed in on a file labeled Human Military Doctrine. The room leaned in closer as he spoke. Unlike most species, humans do not fight for territory. They do not fight for resources. They fight for something else entirely. He swallowed hard before saying the last part. They fight for each other. Arvok's claws tightened into fists. The officer continued. They do not abandon their own. They do not leave their people behind. If one human is taken, the rest will come, and they will never stop. A deep silence filled the war chamber. Arvok's breathing was slow, controlled. But inside, his mind raced. They had taken human prisoners. They had assumed it would break the species, weaken them. Instead, it had summoned the storm. And now, it was too late to stop it. Supreme Lord, Calith said hesitantly, should we open negotiations, offer to return the prisoners? Arvok's pride burned at the suggestion. The Zirak Dominion did not beg for peace. They conquered. But this was different. He turned to the intelligence officer. This human warship, what are its capabilities? The officer swallowed hard. It has no energy shields, Supreme Lord. Its armor is thicker than anything we've ever seen. It does not rely on speed or evasion. It is designed to endure anything and still keep moving. Arvok's breath slowed. A moving fortress, he muttered. The officer nodded grimly. And its weapons, Supreme Lord, the Council reported that it fired 1 railgun shot near their blockade. That single shot was enough to disable multiple ships with its sheer force. The war chamber was silent. The Zirak had angered a species that did not fear death. Arvok slowly rose from his throne. His generals awaited his command. Would he fight? Would he surrender? His pride screamed at him to resist. to show strength. But deep down, a terrible thought settled in his mind. What if the humans were not here for war? What if they were here for justice? And if that was the case, the Zyrak Dominion was already doomed. The Zyrak defense fleet floated in the cold darkness of space, waiting. Warships, battle cruisers, and heavy dreadnoughts lined up in a tight formation, their weapons locked onto a single target. The HSV Revenant was nearly there. Inside the command center of the Zyrak flagship, Bloodfang, Supreme Lord Arvok stood at the front of the war table. His generals and admirals stood behind him, their nervous glances hidden behind hardened expressions. "Status report," Arvok ordered. One of the tactical officers, his reptilian scales dark with stress, cleared his throat. "The human vessel will enter firing range in 5 minutes, Supreme Lord." Arvok's claws dug into the metal railing. 5 minutes. 5 minutes before they tested whether their fleet could stop what was coming. He turned to his weapons officer. "Are all ships ready?" "Yes, Supreme Lord. We have over 70 warships in formation, all weapons primed. The Revenant may be strong, but it cannot withstand our full firepower." Arvok nodded, but something in his mind whispered a warning. What if it could? He pushed the thought aside. They were the Zyrak Dominion, the most feared empire in the galaxy. One human warship would not change that. Then the alarm rang. "The Revenant has entered our space," an officer shouted. Arvok's eyes snapped to the main screen. The image of the human warship appeared, growing larger as it closed the distance. The Zyrak ships dwarfed it in number, surrounding it like a hunting pack. Yet it did not slow down. Arvok felt his throat tighten. "Send a final warning." The communications officer activated the channel. His voice was firm but respectful. "Human vessel, this is Supreme Lord Arvok of the Zyrak Dominion. You are violating our space. Power down your weapons and state your intentions, or we will fire." Silence. Then the screen flickered. Admiral James Cutter appeared, his expression cold and unreadable. "I believe you already know why we're here." Arvok's jaw clenched. "This is not how diplomacy works, Admiral Cutter. If you seek peace, you should have contacted us through proper channels." Cutter's voice did not waver. "Peace? You raided our colony. You took our people. You thought we wouldn't come for them." His gaze sharpened. "You were wrong." A low growl rumbled in Arvok's throat. "You're outnumbered, human. Surrender now, and we can negotiate." Cutter's eyes remained unshaken. "Surrender? That's not a word we use." Then the screen cut off. Arvok's blood ran cold. What is he doing? A tactical officer's voice turned into a panicked shout. "The Revenant is charging straight at us." The massive Zyrak fleet opened fire. Laser cannons, plasma torpedoes, and high-energy projectiles filled the void of space, all aimed at a single target. The combined firepower of 70 warships erupted in a blinding storm of destruction. And yet, the Revenant did not stop. It pushed forward, its thick armor absorbing impacts that would have destroyed smaller ships. Railgun rounds ripped through Zyrak formations, tearing through their shields like they were made of paper. Inside the Bloodfang, chaos erupted. Officers shouted conflicting orders, alarms blared, and tactical screens flashed warning after warning. "The Revenant's hull is barely damaged," one officer screamed. Arvok's eyes widened in shock. Impossible. But it was happening. The Zyrak had never fought anything like this before. Their tactics, their weapons, nothing was working. The Revenant moved with unshakable purpose, cutting through the battlefield like a predator among prey. A Zyrak warship tried to flank it. The Revenant responded instantly. Boom! A single railgun shot split the warship in half, sending its wreckage spiraling into space. More Zyrak ships broke formation, their commanders panicking. They're breaking through. For the first time in his life, Supreme Lord Arvok felt something he had never known before. Fear. This wasn't just a warship. This was a reckoning. The Revenant had one mission, and it would not stop until it was completed. Arvok's claws trembled as he realized the truth. The Zirek Dominion had made the greatest mistake in its history, and now they would pay for it. The Zirek warships, once a disciplined and powerful fleet, were now in full retreat. What was supposed to be a show of dominance had turned into a desperate attempt to escape. And at the center of it all, like an unstoppable force of nature, was the HSV Revenant. Inside the Bloodfang, Supreme Lord Arvok gripped the edge of his war table, his claws digging deep into the metal. The holographic display of the battlefield showed a grim reality. They were losing. Badly. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. An officer hesitated before answering. 27 confirmed destroyed, Supreme Lord. Another 14 have suffered critical damage. Arvok's throat tightened. That was nearly half of his fleet. And the Revenant was still coming. The massive human warship continued pushing forward, its powerful railguns tearing through Zirek defenses like they were nothing. Every shot from its cannons meant another Zirek vessel shattered. This is impossible," one of Arvok's generals muttered, his voice shaking. "They're just one ship." Arvok's eyes burned with fury. "No," he growled. "They're not just a ship." He watched the Revenant on the main screen. It moved like a force of vengeance, unstoppable, relentless. It did not dodge. It did not retreat. It was a message. The Zirek had taken human prisoners. They had assumed humans would be weak, that they would surrender like so many others had before. Instead, they had summoned a nightmare. Arvok took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. They had to stop this. "Now, deploy the Dreadpiercers," he ordered. A tense silence filled the bridge. His officers stared at him in shock. "Supreme Lord, are you certain?" his weapons officer asked hesitantly. The Dreadpiercers were the Zirek's most powerful weapons, massive rail spears designed to punch through the armor of planetary defenses. They were so destructive that even the Galactic Council had warned against using them in space battles. But Arvok no longer cared about warnings. "I am certain," he said coldly. "Fire everything." The order was given. Across the battlefield, 6 Zirek warships locked onto the Revenant, their enormous Dreadpiercers charging with deadly energy. Each shot was a weapon meant to crack open planets. If anything could destroy the human warship, this was it. Target locked. Fire. The Zirek fleet unleashed its most powerful attack. 6 enormous projectiles launched at terrifying speeds, glowing red-hot as they tore through the void. The energy readings spiked off the charts, shaking nearby ships with their sheer force. The bridge of the Bloodfang held its breath. And then, boom! The first Dreadpiercer struck. A massive explosion of metal and fire erupted across the Revenant's hull. Then another, and another. For the first time, the human warship staggered. "Yes," a Zirek officer cheered. "Direct hits." A moment of hope flickered in Arvok's chest. Did they do it? Did they finally stop it? The smoke cleared, and his blood ran cold. The Revenant was still there. The damage was visible, deep scars and burning wreckage across its hull. But it did not stop. It did not slow down. Instead, it did something terrifying. It adjusted its course and charged even faster. Arvok's heart pounded. They had wounded it, but instead of falling back, it had only gotten angrier. The Revenant's weapons roared back to life. Its railguns fired with brutal precision, obliterating the Dreadpiercer warships before they could reload. Missiles rained down on the Zirek fleet, tearing them apart one by one. Then the Revenant did something no Zirek had expected. It opened a transmission. The holographic screen flickered, and once again Admiral Cutter appeared. His face was calm, but his eyes were ice cold. "This is your last chance," he said. "Release the prisoners." Arvok's claws twitched. The Zirek did not surrender. They were conquerors, warriors. But as he looked around the bridge, he saw something he had never seen before. His officers were afraid. They were terrified. The Zirak Dominion had ruled through fear for centuries, but now they had met something they feared more than themselves. Arvok turned back to the screen, his pride screaming at him to fight to the last ship. But then he thought of the reports. Humans do not abandon their own. They would never stop. If he refused now, the Revenant would not just cripple the Zirak Dominion, it would burn it to the ground. Arvok's claws curled into fists. He had no choice. He exhaled sharply and turned to his officers. "Prepare the prisoners for release," he ordered bitterly. The bridge fell into stunned silence. No one had ever heard a Supreme Lord give such an order before. "Now," he snapped. His officers rushed to obey. Arvok turned back to the screen, meeting Cutter's gaze. "Your people will be returned. We will send them in escape pods immediately." Cutter gave a slow nod. Smart choice. The transmission cut off. Moments later, dozens of escape pods were launched from Zirak ships. Inside, the human prisoners. Weak, but alive. The Revenant did not fire. It simply waited. Once all the prisoners were safely retrieved, the human warship finally turned away. Without another word, it disappeared into the stars. The battlefield was silent. The Zirak war fleet was broken, their Supreme Lord humiliated. And in the hearts of every Zirak warrior, one terrifying truth remained. The humans had won. The battlefield was a graveyard of broken ships. Wreckage from Zirak warships drifted silently through space, their shattered hulls testaments to the battle that had just ended. The once mighty fleet of the Zirak Dominion had been humbled, their war machines torn apart by a single human vessel, the HSV Revenant. But now, the human warship was gone. Supreme Lord Arvok stood in the silent command center of his flagship, the Bloodfang. His officers avoided his gaze, their usual arrogance replaced by shame and fear. No one spoke. For the first time in Zirak history, they had been forced to surrender. The prisoners were gone, rescued by the humans. The Revenant had left, disappearing into the void like a shadow in the night. But its presence lingered, an unspoken warning. Humans did not forget. Humans did not forgive. And most of all, humans did not abandon their own. Arvok clenched his fists. His empire had underestimated them. That mistake had cost them everything. One of his officers finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "Supreme Lord, what are your orders?" Arvok exhaled slowly. His pride screamed at him to retaliate, to hunt the Revenant down and reclaim their lost honor. But deep inside, he knew the truth. If they went after the humans now, they wouldn't just face one warship. They would face all of them. Arvok turned toward the viewport, looking at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, Earth waited. A homeworld that had just proven its people were not prey, but predators in their own right. For now, the Zirak Dominion would lick its wounds. But war was coming. This defeat would not be forgotten. The humans had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Meanwhile, aboard the HSV Revenant, the warship's engines hummed softly as it moved through space, leaving Zirak territory behind. Inside the command deck, Admiral James Cutter stood with his hands behind his back, watching as the last of the escape pods were brought aboard. The mission was complete. The prisoners, his people, were safe. As the med teams rushed to check on them, Cutter felt the weight on his shoulders ease just slightly. The Zirak had been taught a lesson today, one they wouldn't forget anytime soon. A quiet voice broke the silence. "Admiral, all escape pods have been recovered. The prisoners are alive, though some are in critical condition." Cutter nodded. "Make sure they get the care they need." "Yes, sir." Another officer approached, his expression tense. "Sir, we just received a priority transmission from Fleet Command." Cutter turned to him. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and the face of Fleet Admiral Sophia Rice appeared. Her expression was unreadable, but Cutter could see the tension in her eyes. "Admiral Cutter," she said, "you did well." "We got our people back," Cutter replied. "That was the mission." Rice nodded. "Yes, And now the entire galaxy knows what happens when someone dares to take humans hostage. She paused, her expression darkening. But this isn't over. Cutter's jaw tightened. He had been thinking the same thing. The Zirak Dominion was too powerful, too proud to simply accept this defeat. There would be consequences. Reyes continued. We've intercepted some internal Zirak communications. They're calling this battle a disgrace, a humiliation, and their leaders want revenge. Cutter took a slow breath. How long do we have? Not long, Reyes admitted. They won't attack immediately. They'll regroup, plan. But when they come, it won't be just one fleet. They'll bring everything they have. Cutter wasn't surprised. He had spent years studying the Zirak. They were ruthless conquerors, an empire built on strength and fear. And now that fear had been turned against them. Then we prepare, Cutter said simply. Reyes gave a small smile. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The screen went dark. Cutter turned back toward the viewport, staring into the endless black of space. The Revenant had proven something today. Humanity was not to be underestimated. But their fight was far from over. The Zirak would come back, with more ships, more weapons, more destruction. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The HSV Revenant moved through space like a silent predator, its massive hull still scared from battle. The crew worked tirelessly, repairing the damage and preparing for the next fight. Inside the command deck, Admiral James Cutter stood before the main screen, his eyes fixed on the incoming data streams. The Zirak Dominion had gone silent since their defeat, and that silence was dangerous. A low chime rang across the deck as the communication system activated. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Fleet Admiral Sophia Reyes. Her expression was grim. We have confirmation, she said without preamble. The Zirak are preparing for war. Cutter's jaw tightened. He had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down his spine. How bad? They're mobilizing everything, Reyes replied. Multiple fleets, dreadnoughts, planetary assault carriers. They aren't just planning to strike back at us. They want to wipe us out. The command deck fell into silence. Every officer, every crew member, understood the weight of those words. Cutter exhaled slowly. How long do we have? Maybe a few weeks, Reyes said. Maybe less. We don't have enough ships to fight them head-on. The High Command is organizing a full-scale defense, but we need time. Time. Something they didn't have. Cutter's mind worked fast. The Zirak had superior numbers, but the Revenant had proven something in battle. Humanity could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight even the strongest enemies, and that gave him an idea. He turned to Reyes. What if we don't wait for them to attack? Reyes narrowed her eyes. What are you suggesting? Cutter's gaze hardened. We strike first. Zirak Prime, the heart of the Dominion. Supreme Lord Arvok sat in his war chamber, watching the holographic projections of his fleets. They were ready. The humiliation at the hands of the humans would not be forgotten. The Zirak had never suffered such a disgrace. It was unthinkable that a single human warship had defeated an entire fleet. But that mistake would not be repeated. Arvok turned to his generals. Are the invasion fleets prepared? Yes, Supreme Lord, one of them replied. Our forces will crush their colonies first, then advance toward their homeworld. Arvok's claws tapped the table. He wanted vengeance, but he was not reckless. Humans had proven they were dangerous. This time, the Zirak would come with overwhelming strength. No mercy, no survivors. Then, suddenly, alarm sirens blared across the chamber. Arvok snapped his head up. What's happening? An officer rushed in, panic on his face. Supreme Lord, human warships have entered our space. Arvok froze. What? They've bypassed our outer defenses. They're attacking our supply lines, our shipyards, our war factories. Arvok's blood ran cold. This was impossible. The humans were supposed to be preparing for defense, not attacking first. Then the main screen flickered, an incoming message. Admiral Cutter's face appeared. Surprised, Cutter's voice was calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. Arvok snarled. "You dare?" Cutter cut him off. "You thought we'd wait for you to bring your entire fleet to our doorstep." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze like a dagger. "No, we're bringing the war to you." Arvok's rage boiled. "You cannot win against the Dominion. We will crush you." Cutter tilted his head. "Maybe." Then his eyes darkened. "But before that happens, we're going to make sure you bleed." The screen cut off. And then the bombardment began. The strike of the Revenant. The HSV Revenant, along with a strike force of human warships, had launched a bold and unprecedented assault deep into Zirak space. Their target, the Zirak war machine itself. Shipyards, fuel depots, weapon factories, everything the Zirak needed to sustain their invasion. The human fleet moved like ghosts, striking with surgical precision, destroying critical infrastructure before the Zirak could react. The Revenant's railguns fired, cutting through enemy stations like a blade through armor. Zirak defenders scrambled to mount a counterattack, but they were caught off guard, unprepared for such an audacious move. Explosions lit up the void as fuel reserves detonated. Entire shipyards crumbled. The Zirak were not ready for this kind of war. By the time their fleets finally started to respond, the Revenant and its forces were already gone, disappearing into the shadows of space. They had come like a storm and left nothing but ruin in their wake. The turning point. Back on Zirak Prime, Supreme Lord Arvok stood in stunned silence. He had underestimated them again. Humans did not just fight. They did not just defend. They struck back. And now his carefully laid invasion plans were falling apart. The Zirak war machine was crippled. Their supply lines were shattered. And worst of all, the rest of the galaxy had seen it happen. Fears spread among Zirak commanders. If humans could wage war like this, then they were not prey. They were apex predators. For the first time, the Zirak Dominion faced a new reality. Humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. And now, the real war had begun.